you so much because it doesn't hit mine for a while. So it's still.
Yeah, well, and I'm at like 14, so I got a little bit, but I feel like sometimes the ingress is like all you need.
The rocket ship takes off before it needs to.
Right. I'm like, I'm going to be like this when it finally gets to 14. I'll be like, I can't come out. I'm holding my chair, like that will be my influence at that time.
Well, I hope I'm here to see it so that
it'll be me with my like hair blown back. I'm like, Rebecca,
totally.
Uranus is at 14.
I'm like, thank God it's still really far away from me at 29.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Eat and Greet, where in the next hour, hopefully we're going to give you something that is worth the time that you took to show up. And I most certainly think that we're going to today. We're going to talk about psychic signatures, which is such a cool topic. And it's just, I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but like there was so much that happened for me when I was younger. There were these periods of time where I was like, what is lit up in my chart? Because the world that is in between is like popping and sparking through. So to explore, what are these psychic signatures? Do you have them? Do you not have them? What does that look like? I went out and I've brought this beautiful Rebecca over to share with us.
Oh, it's so good to be here.
Yeah, it's almost spring. So I feel like under the energy of the Pisces festival, this is the time to have this chat.
Oh my God, it's the perfect time to have this chat because it's like all of our spidey senses are just even more heightened than normal.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. I was just saying to somebody today, because it's been the most random thing with conversations, which when I pop back in, I'm like, oh yeah, we're in Pisces season where, I'm talking about a sofa with somebody and all of a sudden we're back 30 years to their time in college and we're having this exploration of the past and memories. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's Pisces season. We are not going to, first of all, stay on track. Second of all, we're going to explore that space in between the spaces.
Yeah, while I'm eating soup. All the time this season. Soup every meal. Who cares?
Oh my God, I love it. And it's so funny because I have chocolate today, which is not, I know I'm a Taurus and I know I have all this Venus, but the chocolate is one of my least favorite foods. So I got to be in a spot to have some chocolate. So today it's have some chocolate day. And I'm not like, look, I'm such a good not advertiser. I'm like,
I'm just showing off my beautiful bowl. I was thinking too, yeah, what happens when two Tauruses come together? I just want to talk about food with you. I'm like, let's just talk about food and flowers.
Yes. Well, okay. So first of all, let's do a little housekeeping, you guys, and then we'll get in here and meet Rebecca a little bit more, but housekeeping, we're coming up to March 22nd, where officially the YouTube Academy will begin. As of this evening, you guys should be able to check out the landing page and see the full year curriculum and see the pathway of where we're going all year long, who's going to be teaching your courses, and these things are rolling out. Now, if you've not had an opportunity to watch the preview course for the Academy, where SJ Anderson and I broke down the election chart for the Academy and therefore the official natal chart of YouTube Academy, make sure you check that out in the Kickstarter playlist. It's up and available right away on the home screen, so you can check that out. Okay. Now, another thing to keep in mind when we roll around and we get to March 20th, it's International Astrology Day. So all over the internet, you're going to see astrologers, associations, groupings doing things and just celebrating astrology that day. And that will be the same over here as well. So this year, we're going to take a lot of advantage of using the community tab on this page, and we'll have different quotes and information from all kinds of different astrologers. So come on over. If you haven't explored the community tab before, this will be your chance to do it. Go to the home screen, click community, and then you can see what's going on all day on the 20th. Not that there's just not like astrology 24/7 over here anyways, but a little party. A little something. So welcome everybody. And hopefully you've got your snacks. I see somebody's out here having they're drinking beer and chocolate. So do you? I love that. I love that for you.
Perfect.
Right? That is absolutely perfect to get in between the worlds. So Rebecca, I ask everybody when they come, how'd you get into astrology? How'd you find your way to Astro Island?
Oh, Astro Island. Yeah, I always think it's such a funny story because about 10 years ago, I just thought astrology was really stupid. Like I just thought it was dumb because people would tell me I was a Taurus, but I didn't really feel like a Taurus. Now I feel much more like one. But it was about 10 years ago when I started studying at the California Institute of Integral Studies with Richard Tarnas. And
Okay.
and he's an astrologer who really focuses more on the planets rather than the signs. And that was kind of my entry point into astrology. Was it's very non-traditional astrology, which I get. We didn't focus much on the houses. There's not a huge focus on the signs. It's really on what are these archetypal signatures of the planets and how has that been informing our lives over time. And so studying with him 10 years ago was really what got me on the track. Otherwise, I just thought it was kind of silly. I thought I was like a really serious intellectual and didn't have space for astrology. And now here I am as my world and life.
As an astrologer.
As an astrologer.
That's
full
awesome.
time. So yeah.
Why that course of study in the first place with Richard Tarnas? What was your inside world that brought you there?
Yeah, so I was starting a master's program in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness. And so I just wanted to study what is the universe, right? Like, what are these big questions of being human? And that's why I started the program. And I wanted to be enchanted with life. And that's what philosophy does for me, is how do we get out of these mechanistic, more scientific, linear thinking and really think about what does it feel like to be human and the big questions of being human. So philosophy was what kind of gave me an entry point. So I was getting my master's degree with him. I was also studying with a cosmologist and environmental activists and psychedelic researchers. And so my brain just got kind of blown open. And then I did my thesis research on the human connection to the stars and language. And I was like, well, I'm just in this now. Like there's no other track. I can't go back to like film publicity or PR. I'm just like,
yeah. This is it, right?
This is it. I'm just like an astro geek now, and people get tired of talking to me, and that's fine.
Yeah, that's totally okay. But
It's
so,
okay.
you find your way in, you start this study, and what happened for you to become a professional, like really doing this at professional capacity?
Yeah, that's a good question because I've only been full-time maybe for 6 years, I think, 5 or 6 years. And I don't even know. I mean, it just took time. It's like I was really interested. I was doing a few readings. I recommend even to my clients not to spend too much time looking at other people's charts until you've looked at your own chart for at least like 4 or 5 years, like really dug in. And I really love studying astrology with community. I think that's why I'm so excited about what you're creating, is that I studied astrology in a group of women for 5 years. And we met every week and we just talked about astrology. And so my way of learning was so communal that I find it hard to think about self-study sometimes because It's so fun to hear about how different people experience the same archetype or the same part of the chart. And so I think just a few years ago, when I finally was like, okay, I've studied my own chart long enough. Like, I think it's time to put it out there. And it's always a big leap, to go into self-employment, but I am amazed and so grateful, so grateful that it has worked out for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just put out some cool stuff. It's so funny. I remember because we met doing a summit together.
Yes.
That was like our intro. And it's so funny. I think I even said it then, but I was like, oh, who is she? She has got some Taurus placements and she's like Taurus. She's like the witchy tourist. But I like that, and just having you just carry that energy of like knowing, what you feel like to me is like the breeze is always with you.
Oh.
Yeah, like it's a really neat thing when we interact because it's just like you're carrying this witchy nature with you that is just lovely. So I love the way that you bring this to life.
Oh, thank you. And I think you understand this too, Stormy, that when you're an astrologer, there's so many astrologers out there. It can be, I think a lot of what I've been confronting is like, what is my voice in this, right? What is my role? Because it's not going to be the same as other people. And I think that's the fun of being an astrologer now when there are so many astrologers, is like the people who are pulled to me as clients know that like, this is what they want.
Right.
And that's the fun part of it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so we're going to talk today about these psychic signatures in the chart and in our experience. And, I'm a little bit curious as well. How did this become a topic of focus for you?
I don't even, yeah, it's like, how did it become a focus? I started to notice, and I think this is my Cancer rising, which I'll talk about kind of the rising signs, obviously, but I would notice as soon as I started talking to someone, there were certain people where my brain would start to tingle and get really weird. It was like I was in an ASMR trance.
Yeah.
And whenever that would happen with a client, I remember thinking, okay, this person is really intuitive. And it's this signal to me to really trust them in whatever they're bringing, and also really trust that we're both channeling in this moment. And so it was initially just was this tingling. I used to think I was like getting faint or dizzy, and I'd have to just pause and be like, I'm just not feeling well. I need to have some water. And then realizing, no, that was actually just kind of my intuition activating. And that was my somatic signal.
Yeah. Oh, that's so neat, right? And it is cool when you do figure out the somatic signals when you're working with people and what it means to you.
Completely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
And the different signals for different people, right? How certain, and I would start to notice a pattern of like this combination, I would get the head tingle. Other people, I'd get this like a weird sensation in my stomach. Other people, my hands would go on fire. It was just a fun. And I realized that was the Cancer rising, somaticizing the body immediately.
yeah. Brilliant. All right, man. Well, I want to just know all about this ever.
Oh God. Well, so I think what's really fun to think about first is that I'm sure so many of you and your clients would identify as probably, empathic or a highly sensitive person. These are things I've noticed. Those identities also tend to really shift the level of intuition and sensitivity that someone feels.
Sure.
And so that also feels a part of the conversation. I also think about the different places where we receive information in our body. And I recently learned, it was about a year ago, I was in this Academy of Intuitive Medicine in the Bay Area. And they talked about these telepathic chakras, which are behind your eyes. So it's different than, your third eye or the top of your head, but that your eyes were these centers of intuition where you would get information. And I was having this terrible eye infection at the time when I was going there. And I realized it was because I wasn't controlling my telepathy. And so I was getting, one of my eyes was just kind of being taken over by information.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
So that's also something I love to think about with my clients is, where are the places you're getting information? For some people, maybe it's the crown. For some people, it's the third eye. For some people, it's their eyes. For other people, it's their sacral chakra, where we get empathic information. For other people, it's their heart or their gut. And this is also just something to kind of put out there is, then you can start to see where it's showing up in different places in your body where you might be getting the information.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and so for me, the readiness to understand that those things are very real has been in place since I was really young. So there was never any doubt that I was receiving information and being able to just physically see spirit, see things like that. It was relatively established. But when things changed for me somatically was when I had children. And then I started to get information in a really different sense. And still today, I mean, my oldest is getting ready to be 18. And when something is going on with my children, it hits in the exact same way and the exact same place. So it is this neat evolution that it's like there are more places where very specific lines of information are coming in on specific things because nothing hits me in the same way that does.
That is so, that makes so much sense to me about that child, that bond between parents. I also wonder, I didn't believe in astrology, but I definitely believed in intuition and these other pieces. But I think it took me a long time to actually realize how, I think this is a process too, is owning that power rather than it kind of owning you. And so when people get really overwhelmed or they're in groups and they feel overwhelmed, often for me, it's like, well, yeah, you're just picking up on all these signals and you don't understand that's necessarily what's happening. It's like you're getting fried with information,
Right.
but you just think you're overwhelmed or you're anxious. And like, I think that was the piece too of teasing out the sensitivity and knowing that it was there versus just anxiety.
Right. I know. Well, because I think that something that I've discovered with myself and with clients is like, we'll get up in the morning with this like low level anxiety and think that that's normal. And it's like, oh, it's actually not. I think that when we tap in and we can kind of understand that there's an energetic body working with the physical one, it becomes like Princess and the Pea.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Where it's like that low level anxiety is telling you there's a pea like 75 mattresses down.
God,
Let's talk about that. let's talk about that one thing down there, but you become a little bit more attuned to it, maybe.
For sure. And the princess, I think about that all the time because I'm like, if anything is off in my environment, I can't sleep. My neighbors wakes up at 6 a.m. I don't know they're awake, but suddenly they're talking and I'm like, oh yeah, that's why I woke up, because they're awake. It's just always a thing. And this other piece I was thinking about, Stormy, is that there's, people often talk about the four clairs, right? Like the clairvoyance, clairsentience, cognizance, and I can't think of the last one, clairaudience, right?
Yeah.
But I think that there's all these other ways of knowing, and that's what I get excited to think about is that, I think about telepathy as being something different, where you're actually mentally communicating with someone. That feels really different to me than just like getting a download drop in, right? Mm-hmm. Or precognition, where you're knowing the future versus just knowing something.
Right.
Or I get a lot of like hand psychometry, where I can like feel energy fields with my hands. That feels like a totally different type of psychic and intuitive process. So I think this is the fun part of, I think we've tried really hard to define it as these four clairs. And yet to me, it's almost endless, the different ways that intuition can show up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it just, like we were talking about a little bit before, the way that it shows up for different people, some may be stronger right now and some may advance later. I do feel like sometimes with intuition and the psychic signature, it's like fitness. How often do you lift that particular spiritual or psychic connection? Because you cannot like go to the gym without ever working out and then get in there and like run the 50s up and down. Like that's not the thing. So it's like, also, how much do you exercise that?
Yes. How much are you exercising it? And I think that's always so fun when I get that tingling feeling talking to a client. I'm like, do you identify as intuitive? And some of them are like, no, not at all. It's not something I think about. Right. And then you're realizing, right, they just haven't used this entire skill set. And there's like a massive amount of wisdom. I mean, obviously all of us are intuitive, but certain people have it a bit more intensely.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah. And so what does that look like? I mean, when I'm just over here looking at a chart, am I like, good? It's all 12th house magic, right? Because I know I get clients who say that all the time. They're like, I have all of this in the 12th house. Am I actually a psychic? I'm like, well, I mean, let's explore.
Yeah, completely. It's also funny you mentioned the 12th house piece, because so much of archetypal astrology of my lineage is we don't put a lot of weight on the houses. Okay, and so much of my background is actually tracking the Neptune aspects and seeing that as so much more of a signature. But you were mentioning, it's like the rising I always see, right? If someone has, a bunch of stuff in their 12th house or a Pisces or a Cancer rising, I feel like their whole entry point into the world is through that kind of receptivity, right? And so the Pisces rising is more of maybe this receptivity that's knowing things. The Cancer rising like myself is more of like feeling things. Sure. Right? It's almost like, where is it landing differently from that place? So I definitely think about the rising sign as a big one. Something I don't know if you talk about with your clients is whenever I see a Mercury retrograding in someone's chart, I automatically know like this person is probably far more intuitive than they realize.
Absolutely, because that Mercury is so introspective. It is picking up on all sorts of things that may not be readily available to the perception or conception. Yeah, absolutely. I think a Mercury retrograde, I'm like, trust that guy.
Completely. I see that in the chart. And I'm like, this is what makes them so good in business, or this was going to make them so good in whatever. And I always get that image of all these antennas, and especially with Mercury retrograding, where there's all these antennas on top of their head and they have all these frequencies and they're just trying to hear which frequency makes the most sense.
Exactly. No, I agree with you 1,000%. And in the retrograde, it's like, well, of course, what I can hear the most are the things from the past or the things that are not always seen, right?
Completely.
Which is interesting, because then when we get a Mercury retrograde that gets stimulated by a Mercury retrograde, this is actually where I feel like our psychic friends who have that are way overstimulated because they're thrown out of themselves.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I've had clients say two different things, where one, they've said it's easier when it's in retrograde because it's like their Mercury feels more familiar in that motion. Okay. And then, others say it's even more overwhelming because of it. So I guess obviously by person. Sure. I tend to get super intuitive. I mean, I definitely get more intuitive during Mercury retrograde cycles.
Me too.
Yeah, I have like I could go on a whole diatribe about how people make Mercury retrograde thing to be such a big deal. And I'm always like, I don't understand why, because I just feel like I get so much information that I wouldn't have otherwise.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's also, I don't know about you, but I'm receptive to it. And I know that people who kind of watch this channel also have that same vibe and that same idea that like you don't get weird during a retrograde, you get wise, right?
Yes.
Because that's when all the stuff's coming back. So it's much more of an atmosphere of like welcoming the retrograde experiences to the intuition. So
yeah. I mean, God, we could talk about that forever. I would always be like, let's plan, not predict during a retrograde.
Yeah, that's like 3 other eat and greets we could do on that topic.
Totally. And every single retrograde, each retrograde of what it feels like. But yeah, so of course Mercury retrograde, always a big one. Of course Mercury in like Pisces or Cancer, Aquarius, or Gemini. There's also something around like a different type of knowing or an expansive knowing, or like more future predictive sort of knowing.
Right. Yeah.
Definitely see with that.
Seeing between worlds and beyond, to infinity and beyond.
Completely. And then the aspects, I always look for Mercury aspecting Uranus or Neptune. And, I didn't mention Chiron, but I always see Chiron too as such like an intuitive hit in the chart when someone has a strong aspect with their sun, their moon, their rising, or with Mercury, because I often think of Chiron as seeing pain, and that's a whole other different type of intuition.
Right.
Seeing where someone's maybe feels less than or feels or insecure. And I'm like, there must be a word to make up that's like, what is that? Because it's not just knowing an emotion, it's actually knowing where their entire tender part is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that soft underbelly. Yeah, Chiron is a good identifier of that. And it's so funny because I just remembered this episode of Grey's Anatomy because I've been following that since the beginning, y'all.
Oh, of course.
My God, since before it was a preview. Okay, I really had to take a break from Grey's Anatomy when Derek died. I took like a 2-year break because I was so heartbroken.
It was terrible.
It was terrible. But there's this episode in there where Dr. Bailey's son gets hurt, and the other person who's in the hospital is a nature healer. And before anything's happening, the nature healer is like, this is where the issue is. You're treating this, and this is the pain. This is the wound. This is the issue. And that's a lot of what I think about with Chiron as well. And she was able to identify. And like you said, it wasn't, is he traveling between the worlds, which is fine. It was very specific to where is the actual wound.
Yeah. I don't know if you can hear that, but my neighbor just started playing his guitar. It feels like such a Sun Neptune moment where suddenly there's like background music.
Yeah, it's providing us a little ambiance.
Totally. Yeah, I'm so glad that's such a great example, because I do have a lot of clients who work in the medical field. And I mean, that's a whole other conversation around the asteroids that I see the most with people who work in the medical field. But yeah, they're knowing of where there's the healing that needs to happen. Feels like, it's an entirely different intuitive knowing. We should make up a word for it. Sorry. I mean, we should just
let's coin some things.
So if it's the pain, it's like I want to make it really scientific though. So it's like Claire chirotic.
Oh, girl, that is good. Patent pending.
Okay. Please don't use that.
Please don't take our word.
Until I've written about it or posted some sort of academic study.
Right. Okay, so what else we got? We've got the Neptune axes, or the Neptune influences plus aspects, Mercury retrograde, Chiron.
Mm-hmm. And I would think all of these obviously also in relationship to the sun or the moon or the rising, right? So Chiron with the sun or the moon, Neptune with the sun or the moon, Uranus with the sun or the moon. And there's another one that I don't know, or the one that I follow Black Moon Lilith a lot.
Okay.
And I have seen, this brings up another question of the difference between intuition versus instinct.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I feel like for me, intuition feels like it's coming more from beyond, versus instinct feels like it's coming more from just me without any other sources.
And it's this sweet spot, I think, in the middle where instinct and intuition move. And that is like the duck in water, where you just watch it do the most natural thing. Because I think sometimes for me, my instinct on its own, I can run that a bit wild. That runs real close tie to the the fearful parts of my ego for me, where it's like, it's like if somebody slams a door, right? Where I'm going to do this out of fear,
Yeah.
and it can be that. But when it gets paired with that sweet place of my intuition, it's like watching me do the most natural thing that it looks like I've done it 1,000 times.
Yes, that was exactly the way that I was feeling it, is how those two can come together. But I see Black Moon Lilith, and of course like Mars as well, as more of that instinct, right? And so when you compare Mars in a sign of like Pisces or Cancer, or a sign that is more receptive, that's where those two can meet. And when I see Lilith often in a sign that's more receptive, it's the same thing, where that instinct can just get so witchy and more powerful because it's paired with that intuition.
Yes. Which is funny because I mean, I just think of the story of like Lilith in general, you know, whichever story, but I love it that Lilith was like, yeah, no, this isn't working for me. I don't like this get up. I don't like the scenario. I'm leaving.
Yeah. Well, do you know, I mean, it's so funny. So I'm Jewish, and I'm part Jewish, and I got really into the place in the Jewish Bible, the Talmud, where Lilith, the whole story takes place. And I don't know that a lot of people know this, but she left to be with it's called a demon angel. But the word demon comes from the word daemon. This is where my thesis research comes in. And that it comes from the word meaning soul. So I interpreted she left Adam to meet her soulmate. She met someone who didn't want her to be an equal and found her soulmate. And they made hundreds of babies a day. She was so fertile and creative. And then God decided that he wanted to kill her babies because she didn't return to Adam. And the word lullaby comes from Lilith goodbye. It was this women trying to protect their children from being stolen from Lilith. And so there's this weird, it's like a mother instinct intuition too, that I feel so much with Lilith.
Yeah. Yeah. I think she's getting a mixed rap. I don't really, pick a religion, pick a cultural influence or perspective. I'm like, Lilith sometimes gets the shaft, but she's a 2-part thing, I think.
Completely. She was the first woman in that Judeo-Christian tradition to say no to God. I mean, that says everything, right? Like the first woman to be like, no, sorry, not doing this your way. And look what it caused.
Yeah. She's like, yeah, Adam's nice and all, but Bob is great.
But Bob's my soulmate and Adam won't let me be on top. So,
right. You know what, God, don't let the good be the enemy of the great, okay?
Do I think about Lilith a lot when I think about intuition and instinct, is how Lilith can work with our intuition to really give this like witchy powerhouse sort of thing.
Yes. That's great. This is so funny. I'm just laughing with people in the chat, and it's like having this exploration today is so nice.
Yeah, all this. I'm like, what else are we going to do with all this Neptune? I mean, I just am like, do I sleep? Do I just zone out on Netflix? Do I just eat all day long? I mean, my client sessions, I'm just like, well, floating off in space.
So if somebody is looking at their chart right now, which oftentimes people show up to the eat and greets and they bring the snack and they bring the chart, and they're looking at their chart right now. Just to recap, we want to look at what's your rising sign and the connections, any connections that you have there, especially to Neptunian placements. Look at the sun and moon connections, conjunctions to Neptune, Uranus. Did I leave one out? Chiron.
But I think this is where, it's obviously there's going to be so many combinations, and each combination is going to kind of point to a different type of intuition and instinct.
Yeah.
Right. And so, of course, you can have 4 or 5 different types of intuition. And that's kind of the magic, is then you have all these different ways of getting information, rather than just, I think the way we often think of is sometimes with just like more Pisces or Neptune, where it's like you're downloading. To me, that's just like one small way.
Right.
Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's interesting, because I'm just having this thought that it's like, really, if any of us just grab our charts and really maybe focus in on the Neptunian energies, it's not about do you have that psychic signature, but just what is yours.
Completely. I think everyone is super intuitive. I think it's more of, discerning what type of intuition you have so that you can lift that up, because maybe you're not a Mercury, opposite Neptune person. And so your mind isn't getting these downloads, but you're feeling it in your body. Maybe your moon is in aspect to Chiron. And so you're feeling where people feel pain. Mm-hmm. And that's your psychic superpower. I keep thinking it'd be fun to write. I mean, I started writing out kind of a list of these different superpowers, but they're kind of endless, and how fun to think you don't get to just pick one. You probably have a few.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, right? Because I was looking at a chart just earlier with someone and looking at truly all the Neptunian energy that was available through the 12th house. There's also the Mars, the Venus 12th house, which is just, there was so much going on. And it's so funny. And this woman, she is like a collector of old people. Like she just loves them, and she like is getting everybody's mail, and she can just sense when something's going on with them, and in her neighborhood, she's taking people, like when COVID hit, she was getting all of their groceries, and she just has that very 12th house, but like Piscean specialized population kind of vibe. And that's just the natural setup in her chart. And she maybe wouldn't have thought to look at it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I was also thinking so much about when I think of the Neptune, it's like feeling the Pisces and Neptune of like the dissonance, right? Like the energetic dissonance is so much an aspect of intuition, right? Of like feeling like, why does this, even if, so we talk about clairsentience or like, something, but all those moments when you don't actually know cognitively what's off, but that's still an intuitive sense.
Yeah.
Right? Like this feels off. Why does this feel off? We don't necessarily know.
Yeah,
But
I'm just having like all of these thoughts right now.
oh, tell me your thoughts, Stormy. Tell me your thoughts.
I just feel like I'm over here breathing it in. And it's so funny because I'm like, oh man, this is just lighting up my Jupiter and Scorpio. And I'm like, like we're going to get to the bottom of this. There's an investigation on the way. So I hopefully you guys are out there too, like, looking at your charts and starting to think and kind of consider, even as we're talking here, okay, well, how does my intuition speak to me? And can I see that in my chart right now? So I would be interested to know what you guys are finding out there.
Yeah. And also, yeah, what areas of the body do you feel knowing? Do you get that gut reaction? Do you get I know a lot of people get like a hand tingling, or do you get an eye infection when you're not seeing? And like, what are these body parts too that are so connected?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. I have Mercury opposing Uranus. So sometimes it is just meeting in the middle of that opposition where it literally will feel like, for me, like a stream of thoughts happening and one that pops through.
Ah,
And it's like the resolution of the opposition where they meet in the middle and they're like, okay, compact it into one big thing and just throw it out there.
I love that. Yeah, I was saying I feel like my sun Uranus, I feel things in my nervous system. Like I think of Uranus, I think of the nervous system. And so my sun Uranus, I feel like when my nervous system feels off, that's when I feel like something's happening. Like I used to predict earthquakes. Like I would always wake up a minute before an earthquake.
Wow.
And then it would happen, and I'd be like, okay, that's why my nervous. That's another type of intuition. How do you predict what's an intuition called where you can predict earthquakes?
Yeah. That's interesting. It's so neat. That's so neat that you have that and you've been able to identify it. But I think it's further neat, like we were talking about, I think in the beginning, when you take your intuition and you involve another person and see how you are intuitively impacting one another. I think that this is, first of all, that would be an exploration in some really cool kind of intimacy.
Yes.
To have that conversation of, like, what does it feel like for you to be around me?
Yeah.
What happens for you? Just like I was telling you, like when I saw Rebecca, I was like, oh, here's a whole vision, and other people have that too. So I think that would be an interesting exploration for us to play with this week. Like, what do you feel like to be around, but to other people?
I love that, because I'm sure you've noticed this, but there are certain clients where, yeah, my intuition is just super powered. And I know that there's a philosopher called Alfred North Whitehead who calls it an interpenetration of souls, where when two people meet, what is this entity that's created? Right. And it's like a psychic, what is this entity? And yeah, there's certainly clients where I'm having a session and I'm like getting information about, their mother's mother and the trip they just went on. Right. And then other people, it's a blank. It's like, I cannot get anything. Right. It's like our souls, our co-created experience just can't match up in the same way.
Yes. Yes. Now, okay, so we've kind of explored like the placements. Oh, did we explore all the placements you had to offer for the signature?
I think so. I mean, I think that I kind of wish I would have just made a list and said, okay, here are the 25 different combinations that make this. But I think for me, so much of the aspects get ignored sometimes. And that's really where the magic can happen, is in those aspects where someone doesn't notice, like, oh, right, there is like a sun sextile or a moon sextile Neptune. So yeah, I am feeling that dissonance in my body, or my Mercury is like square Uranus. And I hadn't thought about that same experience where they just like come in like a lightning bolt and then one lands type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So that said, we kind of have that established, but I want to speak or explore with you for a minute. What happens when somebody does have a strong psychic sense, but they're working really hard to block it out? What do we, how do we support this?
Wow. I just got chills when you said that. I don't know what type of sentience that was, but I do see with certain clients where the not honoring the intuition is like they just keep going up against block after block, right? Like their life isn't working. I mean, all of our lives. It's not like my life works perfectly just because I listen.
Right.
But yeah, it's almost like they're making things so much harder because they aren't hearing. Or that I also have seen where that intuition becomes more of like a constant spinning.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. 1,000%. And so how do we as astrologers and professionals, how do we help people welcome the intuition to the table instead of that blocking it out? What do you offer maybe as some encouragement to allow the intuition to flow? Because while it sounds magical and great to us, to somebody who's likely not trying to interact with it, there's probably some fear basis there, maybe,
Yeah.
something. So tips, maybe if you're having a hard time with your intuition, what can we encourage?
Yeah, some witchy intuitive tips. Well, I find that my intuition really comes alive, um, when I'm not feeling intuitive or I'm not getting information. Meditation, that kind of feels like yeah, we know that. Like if you're still, something may land. I just always find nature. Like whenever I am in like quiet, like I need quiet nature. This is also my moon Saturn, but I'm like, there's no other sound in the forest. That's when I can hear something. It's like all the static and the electricity of human life.
Mm-hmm.
Those places are where I can. And also I was learning about, electromagnetic fields of water with civilization, and how, water is also such a good channel for knowing. And so just sitting near, watching, even just like the bathtub, being in the bathtub, connecting to that receptivity, being near an ocean, being near a stream. Water for me is always the conductor of like an entry point into intuition if something feels stuck.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a video on my channel. And the question is, what do you really want? And it's, what do you want in life? What are you going after? What are you trying to achieve? Whatever. And the basis of the exercise is that you sit near a body of water, whether it's you fill up a bathtub, a sink, you get a big ass cup. I mean, whatever you do, get near water, because spirit, it's very electrical.
Yes.
It's easy to access those places that we can't really see, but we can only talk about, and bring the intuition up. Another thing that I think is really great, just practical things for people to try if you're struggling with your intuition, is go outside and walk. And as you're walking, just say which direction and trust it. Whatever you're doing, walk and trust. And for me, I have a Mars moon, so I have to sometimes do it to know what it is and what it isn't, and I've done a lot of finding out what it's not through action. So I know a lot more about what it is. I'm like, oh, that was totally wrong.
I love that. The other thing that was also coming to mind is I try to do a lot of, we talk about like energy clearing, but when you're really sensitive and those wires can get really crossed, I sometimes just have to take a few moments and just imagine like everything draining out of me that isn't me, right? Or having those energetic practices to kind of clear yourself. Maybe you use a selenite one. Maybe you just, I also like to imagine roots coming out of my feet, because I'm so much more intuitive when I'm grounded, right? Because my wires don't get as crossed. And so for me, grounding practices working with my root chakra, there's so many ways to kind of focus on grounding that for me is what also makes my intuition so much stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So whatever it is, whether you're on the side where your intuition is feeling really lit up, grab your chart, look at your signatures, look at where your Neptunes are interacting. Neptunes, like you have one, okay? But
You have
look at where
seven.
look at where they're interacting and see if you can kind of translate and interpret how your experience of getting the intuition is playing out next to your chart. And if you're struggling, check out some of the grounding tips and techniques that we've spoken to. And maybe even, I think it's probably important to address the fear of trusting the intuition. What's maybe lying right there, because that may be a root that once you start to tug at it, the trust of the intuition can flow a little bit more.
Yeah. You also just spoke to something. You mentioned your Jupiter and Scorpio, and I hadn't thought about this, but for me, Pluto also has in Scorpio too, has such a different type of intuition, right? Where it's maybe not this getting information from out here, but it's knowing when there's something else, right? Like there should be a word for that, where that someone's saying something, but you're like, there's something underneath that thing.
There is, and it is, excuse my language, friends, but it's called the Jupiter and Scorpio. I call bullshit meter.
So that's Claire shit. Should we call it Claire shit?
Yeah. I think so, because my Jupiter is like, yes, I'm hearing all of this and I'm lovingly listening to the other person. And I'm like, no, tell me what's really down there, right? Because that's the nature of Scorpio, of Pluto energy, is to go, that's not quite the root.
Yes.
Like we're getting there, but that's not quite the root. That's still kind of symptomatic, right? So I love that placement for all of us, wherever your Scorpio energies are at. And then, you pair that with whatever planet is there, and it's going to call BS in whatever way. You got a Mars in Scorpio, whatever you're doing, it's going to be like, I'm going to call BS. You're doing it halfway, right? You know what I mean? Right. You're do this other way. So that's a really useful placement in terms of the intuition as well, I think.
Yeah. I was just like, well, yeah, what is that type of knowing where, I think I have a moon with Pluto. Sorry. Yeah. My moon is with Pluto. And I'm always like, I can hear when someone's saying something or when something's happening in a dynamic. And I'm like, whoa, we're not under there yet. Right. Like we haven't made it. Like we're still talking about this other layer, and like, I'm ready to go down here. But if people can't feel that there's something under here, then that's when, of course, Pluto feels like too much or overwhelming. So yeah, I start to think of what kind of Claire knowing does Pluto offer us in terms of how deep that cavern is.
Yeah, well, and I do think it doesn't always get the cred, but I think that Pluto in its full form also offers safety, the intimacy of I'll go with you down here. Because I think that's kind of the beauty of that scorpionic quality, is that Scorpio's not afraid to go to hell and back because it knows its way back to the light. So it's like, are we going down? I got my shovel. We'll go together. Right? So that you can use it for the digging that's down there. But there is a safety in the intimacy of not having to travel alone to whatever that vulnerability is.
Yeah. They're one of my favorite psychotherapists. I can't think of their name. I talk about this a lot with clients, but Scorpio and Pluto tendencies show us where we don't have the intimacy we need, we create intensity.
Yeah. Ooh.
And I'm always like, right. Because when I'm feeling that someone isn't giving me enough depth, that's when I start that poking. And I can feel that there is something under there.
I know. And I do it in such a Jupiter way. I'm like, tell me more about that. And my kids are the best. They're like, Mom, this is it. I don't want to talk about my whole everything. I'm like, tell me more about that.
Why don't you want to tell me more about? Yeah, that's amazing.
And it's so funny. I told my youngest, my Leo, who's got a Taurus moon, so she's not having it with me, and she's so funny. I'm like, well, let's explore that together. And she said, but I don't want to. I'm like, oh, I hear everything. What do you mean?
Oh my God, that's so sweet. Yeah, it's fun to talk about this because I do feel like there's so many ways of knowing that when we just talk about a few, or we just talk more about, I think mostly people associate like Neptune and Pisces with knowing, but it is so fun to think about all these ways of knowing something and kind of their pathway into knowing.
Yeah. Well, and also I'll be interested to see, not just in the chat, but also, if you leave the chat and you leave a comment below this video based on your chart and your experience, like what are your senses of knowing? And then what are the corresponding planetary connections that you found from that? Share that with us underneath this video. I'd love to kind of see the combinations. And the other thing that happens is like, most of the astrologers that I run with are natural researchers. So we come back and we look at all of these different placements that people have, and we're like, 90% of these people had this combination. Psychic, and then we go write papers on it.
Yeah, or write an article for some. Yeah. No, it's so fun to kind of see. And I think what I love to tell people too is that your experience of one planet may be completely different than someone else's. And that's why it's so fun to learn in community, is that you get to decide what feels true to you. And that's another way of knowing, right? Like your truth discerning from someone else's truth, I think is also a way of knowing at
Oh,
the same time.
absolutely. Well, and then you can know what it's like because someone told you. You're like, oh, do you experience this like this? Because Shayna told me she experiences this. And even though it's not my experience, do you experience this way? And I know that that has been a great tool in my practice to say, oh, you sound like you experience the world through the lens of fill in the blank. Check out this
Right.
author, check out this practitioner, right? That's a
Right.
knowing.
That's definitely a knowing. And a part of me feels bad. I don't feel like I gave Lilith like enough time around like the way of knowing that is this, my business name is Wild Witch of the West. Like there is so much for me around the witchy nature of knowing that comes from the earth, and comes from our inner worlds rather than just intuition, and that kind of feralness and wildness that has its own type of intuition and knowing.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh. Well, this has just been so good. I feel like we were a little Neptunian, which I liked.
I expected that. I also apologies if my Neptunian interacted with your Neptunian and intensified it even to more Neptunian.
No, I feel like this was so good in the chat. People are tapping in and talking about their experiences. And I always love when that happens, when we really find a place where we're talking about our current experiences, not just the chart, but also currently, what does that feel like? What are our bodies experiencing? I feel like that always just makes for a good eat and greet together.
Oh, I can't wait to read them because I can't see them right now and I can't wait to read them.
Yes, we'll come back and see everybody in the chat. So you guys make sure you say hi to Rebecca in the chat so she can see you when you're coming back around. But Miss Rebecca, if people would like to come see you, learn with you, study with you, where can they find you?
Oh, this is where I get to do a little self-promotion, huh?
Yes.
So I spend a lot of time on Instagram, Wild Witch of the West. And then also my website is wildwitchwest.com. I offer one-on-one sessions, and I also do a lot of astrocartography, kind of helping people figure out best places to live, best places to work or travel based on their chart. Not that there's a lot of that change happening right now, but it's fun to kind of plan your trips for maybe after everything is open.
Exactly. Well, and just to know, because I know for me in terms of astrocartography, it was like, well, I know that I'm from here and this is where I fit and where I belong and I love where I'm from. And I'm like, but my soul, like this piece of my soul that speaks like this belongs over here. And to get to put that picture together and have an understanding, I think is immense. Like that's freedom. That felt like freedom to me.
Well, and you said that, and I was like, oh my gosh, and we're both from the same place. It's
I know,
just,
right?
it's so sweet.
Yeah, and isn't that wild? We didn't even know that. We didn't know that until we knew that.
Yeah, we just were at similar high schools at the same place, the same time. Probably competing in some of the same sports. I don't know if we talked about that, but
I'm sure. And like, look, full circle, here we are, back again. We're having a comeback.
I would go back and yeah, my astrocartography is not good where I moved, but it is just here. So,
That's brilliant. All right, you guys. Well, we're going to wrap it up for today. And hopefully, in this last 55-ish minutes, we gave you something that was worth the time you took to show up today. I am always grateful that you take the time to show up, comment, come back and watch them. And I look forward to bringing you more interviews. Well, actually, let's see what's next week, the 15th. So we'll have Gordon Mullins, the unlikely astrologer, will be here as well. Melanie Reinhart will be here. We'll be doing an early AM eat and greet for that one since she's on the other side of the world. But just more learning, more spending time exploring the astrological musings are coming up. And remember, in the description box down below, I'll put all of Rebecca's information so you can follow her, chat with her, leave questions, comments down below the video as well. All right. Okay, we love you guys, and we'll see you next time.